to the World Bank Praxis discussion series. I'm Oscar Sabakti. I'd like to welcome our audience here in Sydney and those watching on APAC, online and listening on radio, and everyone watching in Honiara and Port Moresby. And now we're also being streamed live online. Just visit live.worldbank.org to watch and ask a question, and you can follow the discussion on Twitter using the Pacific Praxis hashtag. Well, tourism plays an important role in Pacific Island economies and is one of the region's few economically viable sectors. Total tourism spending in 2013 amounted to US $1.4 billion. In 2014, a record 1.4 million overnight visitors arrived across 11 Pacific Island countries, with Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Palau, Samoa and Vanuatu making up the top 5 destinations. Two-thirds of visitors travelling to the Pacific are from Australia and New Zealand, while the United States, China, Japan and Europe represent significant growth potential. But as one of the most dispersed regions in the world, the Pacific faces unique tourism development challenges, not to mention ensuring the region's unique environments are protected as the sector expands. Well, joining us to discuss these issues and more are Sonja Hunter, Chief Executive Officer of the Samoa Tourism Authority and Chairperson of the South Pacific Tourism Organisation, John Perrottet, Senior Technical Specialist at the World Bank, and joining us via Skype from Port Moresby is Marianna Ellingson, Acting Director General of Papua New Guinea's Office of Tourism, Arts and Culture. Well, thank you all for joining us. Firstly, if I could just open this up to the panel. Tourism in the Pacific conjures up sandy beaches, coconut palm trees and the like. But Sonja, if I could start with you first. As Chairperson of the Pacific's major tourism body, describe to us broadly where visitors are travelling to in the Pacific and the impact that the industry is having on local economies.
Well, first of all, good morning, Oscar, and good morning, everyone from who are actually tuning in. Thank you for this opportunity. Well, as everyone is well aware, the South Pacific is known for its pristine environment, as well as wonderful cultures. And so a lot of our visitors who do come, often for relaxation, just to rejuvenate, actually come. Our traditional markets are, of course, New Zealand and Australia. But we also have other markets who are beginning to emerge and coming to the South Pacific, as you have mentioned before. So the thing is that the South Pacific is a wonderful area. And I know there are a lot of Australians who also travel down. And the challenges for us is to ensure that we practice sustainable tourism, that we don't, that we ensure we maintain these wonderful things, but also that that the type of visitors that we do attract are there to appreciate the same qualities that we have kept for so many years.
Excellent. Well, Mari, you've been with PNG's Office of Tourism, Arts and Culture for 6 years now. Can you describe to us, on a local level, what kind of things are visitors to PNG doing in your country, and how is the tourism industry helping the economy of Papua New Guinea?
Thank you for that question. First of all, I just need to clarify that I'm no longer acting. I'm now a confirmed Director General for the Office of Tourism, Arts and Culture. To go on to your question, people are mainly engaged in surfing, diving, sport fishing, trekking the Kokoda Trail, and bird watching. And so these are just the activities that visitors engaged in. The other thing is that we have 4 national festivals throughout any given year. And along with that, we have smaller festivals. So the culture thing is also quite big in PNG. In terms of how much it's contributing to GDP, it's still not very much. Our figures show in 2014 that it's about 1% of GDP, so we could do with a lot more improvement on what we offer the leisure traveller in Papua New Guinea.
Excellent. And you mentioned those festivals. One of my dream destinations is to visit the Mount Hagen Festival one year, so hopefully I can do that soon. Okay, John, if I can bring you into this discussion now. You've been working on a report that was launched on the Gold Coast yesterday. Tell us about that report that looks at tourism in the Pacific and what you've identified as the biggest opportunities for growth in the region.
Thanks, Oscar, and good morning, everyone. Well, the bank has been studying tourism in the Pacific because it's a very important sector for many of the economies. It contributes anywhere from 1 or 2% up to maybe 20% of GDP, so it's important for the Pacific. And the Pacific has actually done very well, we've discovered in our research. Tourism over the long term is growing about 4.5% per annum, compound growth. That exceeds the world average growth in tourism, and that's good news for the Pacific. But the reality is that it may not be contributing, as far as we're concerned, anywhere near as sufficiently to alleviating poverty and to contributing to income growth. And we're thinking that the research shows that for the tourism industry to be able to do a lot more, it's going to require some more serious policies and some more aggressive approach to markets. So we've discovered, I think, in the course of this research that there are many opportunities for the Pacific to do better. But that needs to be managed very carefully. So now we're at a crossroads a bit. There's an opportunity to study that a little further. The report has been launched with a view to stimulating discussion and getting a response to see, well, how can those countries channel their response in a way that will deliver the tourism growth dividend in a sustainable way.
Excellent. And John, we'll come to those specific strategies a little later. But Sonja, I'd like to ask you, you mentioned that the tourism sector in the region is developing, it's growing, and there's a lot of room to grow. And one potential market that is on the increase is the Chinese tourist. Can you explain to us the impact that has and the potential for that to grow the sector in the region?
If you look at the numbers, as John had alluded to earlier, in yesterday in our discussions when the Pacific paper was launched at the South Pacific Tourism Organization meetings, tourism is the mainstay of the Pacific economy. It attracts, as you said earlier, 1.4 million visitors and therefore contributing about $1.4 billion. And so we're looking at the different markets, as you're well aware, traditional markets we have, but we're looking furthermore to the emerging markets such as China. How do they impact? Well, as you know that they're a lot more, they have a higher yield now that they're venturing out into the Pacific. There are now countries in the Pacific who are actually enjoying, the hosting of Chinese visitors. And as far as the Pacific is concerned, and Samoa, we could do a lot more in developing that market and ensuring that we have greater partnerships, not only with airlines directly from there, as you're well aware, that's one of the challenges that we have at the moment. Asian market also, the Chinese, if you're looking at people who have time-poor schedules. So therefore, we would like to ensure that we do match that expectation when we're talking about, pristine environments, the culture, and with the different kinds of shopping also that is now available in the Pacific. We are there, to ensure that we welcome, and the Chinese market has really grown for us in the Pacific.
Excellent. Mari, can I ask you about that aspect in Papua New Guinea? Is Papua New Guinea looking to reach new markets such as the Chinese tourist? Because we know that the tourism sector in your country is fledgling compared to those in countries like Samoa, in Fiji and Vanuatu. Are you looking to reach new markets as well?
Yes, we're very keen and we're very determined. The airline is making inroads into new markets in terms of negotiations and looking at the possibilities. And I'm sure that they're exploring just beyond China and Japan. So within the next couple of years, we should see new flights coming in from those countries, but that also poses for the industry how to look at those markets and start to target them in terms of the sort of things that they're looking for in PNG.
Okay, interesting. Okay, John, through your research and the work that you did in this report, what are the opportunities and in which markets do they need to grow and what sort of things do these countries need to be doing?
Good question. Firstly, we identified a number of possible market opportunities. This, as I said, is a report that's out there for discussion, so this is not the complete set. It's not a series of recommendations by any means. But we did uncover that there were kind of 4 areas we think that there is some serious potential. The Chinese market we've already discussed. It's the largest outbound tourist market in the world. It spends more than anyone else by a long shot. There's no reason why the Pacific can't take its share of that market, and that will require some fairly careful strategies. Some of the countries are already doing, have initiatives to attract that market. But of course, it's potentially massive and needs to be managed carefully. A second area is in the cruising industry. This part of the world, cruising is a business that's growing very rapidly, and we think there is some very serious opportunity for the Pacific to engage more effectively in that market. And that is a business we think that brings opportunities for countries that are more remote and more difficult to get to have the tourists come to them rather than the other way around. Thirdly, we think that there are opportunities in the upper end of the hotel market. We mentioned earlier, or at least Sonja mentioned earlier, this prospect of improving the yield of tourists that are coming to the Pacific. And we think that the Pacific right now is very sort of underrepresented in some of the international branding of hotels, and there could be a lot more done in that space. And that would attract a tourist that's spending a lot more money. At the moment, the average spend is around this $1,000 a person per trip in country. We think that can be a lot higher. And some of the higher yielding, more exclusive resort type of clients are spending 3 and 4 and 5 times that amount. So that would be an interesting opportunity to pursue as well. And finally, this whole question of the ageing populations, which is of course occurring everywhere in the world. Why shouldn't the Pacific take some benefit from that? Sonja mentioned, why we all travel to the Pacific. The pristine environment, it's a wonderful place. All the range of cultures is very enriching. Given the ageing of populations, both in Australia, New Zealand, in Asia, we think there's an opportunity for the Pacific to look seriously at this prospect of retirees moving to the Pacific for some period of time. They bring substantial amounts of money. And in countries that have gone out and attracted these markets, everywhere from Costa Rica to Malaysia, our research shows that this is potentially a market that could develop or generate a very serious dividend in terms of income for the islands.
Sonja, do you agree with the findings of that report, the areas of improvement that John just mentioned there? Or does that apply to the Pacific Island nations that you oversee in terms of tourism?
I definitely agree with the report, although that there could be a lot more. I mean, if you look at the challenges that we have in the Pacific, a lot of people say we're isolated, but we're in favorable geographical location. This is where everybody can hub and either travel to the South Americas or to Australasia, and you can begin your trip with this wonderful place in the Pacific. Unfortunately, in order to do that, we need access. So, the wonderful report that John talks about, we definitely agree, but it could be a lot more. Those are our challenges. We're looking at access. We're looking at connectivity. Connectivity not only in the way of airline connections, the cruise ships. I mean, that's all part of access, but connectivity also with. If you look at everybody, if we're going to target the Chinese market, of course we want connectivity. We want connectivity in the sense that all the Chinese the elite Chinese visitors, who look for that special place to go, of course they want to be there, but also have the comforts of home. Free Wi-Fi, they can turn on their apps and everything. So we need to be a lot more competitive. So some of us in the Pacific are looking at how we can improve our technology. And I definitely love the report, because of the fact that it actually, when the World Bank speaks, everybody listens. So at least it's highlighting, this tourism paper gives everybody a glance at what, some of the areas that challenges the Pacific, but also that if we take some of these things, as John had alluded to, and be able to help the Pacific, that will be so transformational. And so if, you look at it, and like I said before, when the World Bank speaks, everybody listens. So all those other, ODAs and people around the world who really want to contribute to the development of of the South Pacific, of the Pacific, will definitely be looking at this report. And a lot of us in government will actually be looking at it and ensure that with much enthusiasm, endeavor to address these issues that will grow our people. Because at the end of the day, all of us want to be prosperous, but not in a greedy way, but sort of like comfortably, so that we manage the balance. We practice sustainable tourism. We're able to go and sleep at home at night, knowing that everything is good, and ensuring that we also, the Pacific way of looking at tourism is that they are our guests, and so we also embrace them and ensure that when they actually leave, when our guests leave, they would have been immersed in cultures such as ours that says, look here, look at yourself and look at the way you live, and how everything should always be wholesome. Harmony between man and man, environments, and also our cultures that will provide the difference. And that's what sustainable tourism is all about. Is that not only do we sustain the industry, ensure the industry does well, because it generates job, it generates income for our people, but also ensure that our culture is intact, you ensure that the environment is in contact, and also at the same time that we look at our host communities and be able to give the visitor that special thing that they were looking for, and look after them and pamper them. What we call in Samoa is mili mili.
And
Thank
John,
you.
I'd like to ask you about that issue of sustainable tourism just in a moment. But Mari, if I could go to you before that. You alluded to some of the challenges there in Papua New Guinea, connectivity,
Yes.
infrastructure. What sort of solutions do you see need to be implemented in order to address those issues so that your tourism sector can grow?
A number of things, but I think the main thing is really to seriously look at the tourism industry as an area of investment, real serious investment, like how the government is investing in extractive industries. They need to do something like that to strike that balance, or even more, as tourism and the industry they're made up of renewable sort of products, but also drawing on culture and that sort of thing. But I think really it's the serious investment in this sector. So I think that's one of the challenges, and of course then it then goes in and influences, policy. Government policy, some of the sort of things that John has raised earlier, and not having seen the report yet, but from what he is saying, yeah. So we need to have this kind of mindset shift from putting too much investment into extractive industries, or other than that, match that same investment in the tourism industry. And some of the issues and challenges that Sonja has also raised. So I think that's where I see an important area. It's just to look at it as an investment area that doesn't only address development, but there are other things too that can benefit the nation. Just recently, for the first time, I think, in 40 years, the tourism has been shifted into the economic, it's an economic area, sector. It's an economic sector. Before that, tourism was lumped in with other things in the administrative sector. But for the first time in this year's budget, it's now firmly in the economic sector. And I think what really the industry can do and the government can do with organizations such as mine is to actually seriously look at that as an area of investment and go for it. I think that's the only way we can grow our industry.
I'd also imagine that the tourism industry in Papua New Guinea has the potential to be more inclusive in terms of who it employs, whereas For example, the extractive industry is almost exclusively for men, whereas tourism can employ women as well.
Yes, I think I think in that, I mean, even though the mines employ women, they're in very specific jobs, very specialized, highly specialized areas. Whereas in tourism, you don't need those. Sometimes you don't need all that qualification to produce a really good product. And I think that harnessing indigenous knowledge in some of the cultural products that can be, go towards, contribute towards tourism can be encouraged. So again, it's going to influence policy. And I think it all augurs well for PNG. We just need to know where to hit and when to hit, and to do it right.
Okay, and John, I'd like to follow up on Sonja's point about this idea of sustainable tourism, because we're hearing that there is a lot of potential for growth across the region, but as airports increase, as seaports increase, as the Sheratons, the Hiltons and the big chains start moving in, surely that has an impact on the environment. How do we ensure that the very unique ecosystems and environments across the Pacific are protected as tourism grows?
Well, exactly, that's the objective, Oscar, and if we are looking at the potential of an additional 1 million people across this region, there's no question there is going to be an impact. The countries are already doing quite a lot. At the enterprise level, a number of these companies are working hard because the Pacific, already is a destination that has demonstrated a strong capacity to actually protect the environment themselves. There are regulations in place. We think that many of the countries could do with a lot more help in that area, by the way, in developing more effective policies in some cases, and also in the area of sort of policing and implementation and management of environmental practices, which unfortunately do vary from one country to another. This is really just a case of expertise, resource, access to the right resources and knowledge, and this is an area, in fact, where the bank may be able to help. I think it is the number one objective. There's a lot going on in the world. The bank is involved very strongly with all of the global initiatives in measuring impacts of tourism at the destination level. The UN WTO is a leader in this field, setting standards. We have destination management systems. The bank hosted a conference last year bringing global thought leaders together in working out how we should more effectively measure the impacts of tourism. So there's a lot of knowledge being generated, and the Pacific can take advantage of that knowledge, and we're very keen to kind of be part of that solution.
Excellent. And before we open up to questions, I'd like to ask each one of you if there was one thing that should be implemented to help the tourism sector in the Pacific, what would it be? I'll start with you, Sonja.
Wow. I don't know if I can cut it down to one, but it would definitely be access.
Access.
Yes, it would definitely be increase of airline seat capacities in whatever form, either from, we have sufficient from the traditional markets, but maybe looking into not only the Asian market, but also China, of course, but also to the North American market and the European market, which we used to enjoy in the 1990s. We'd like to reinstate those connections again. So it's definitely airline access.
Okay, John?
Oscar, I think around the world governments are increasingly realising that tourism is a sophisticated business. It requires a professional approach, but it also requires an integrated response from government. It is complex, it touches on many subsectors, and no one tourism ministry can deliver the kind of outcomes that everyone is looking for. So I'd be encouraging the governments of the Pacific to sort of bring that request to the people who can assist them. Institutions like our own and the other donor organisations in an integrated kind of way. We're seeing this across many of our other clients, and I think the Pacific could learn a lot from that.
And Mari, if there was one thing that you could implement now, what would it be?
Really, it's the cost of travel. We need to, it's very, very high flying into PNG and flying within PNG. And that, that actually limits accessibility to Papua New Guinea. And that limits accessibility for other, the destinations within our destination. So I think that a greater partnership and a very realistic partnership should be established with our national airline, and other smaller airlines, because you can only access the country within and from without through civil aviation, through airlines, through flights. So that's the one thing I think is really the cost of travel.
Excellent, thank you, Mari. Okay, on that note, we'll open up to questions now from Sydney, from Honiara and Port Moresby, as well as from online. So if you can think of your questions while I entertain these first few. So we've got a question from the live stream from John. Now, he says, you mentioned the older markets coming up perhaps to a property... Oh, actually, no, sorry, let me paraphrase. John, actually, you mentioned that the retiree market could be lucrative for the South Pacific. What coordination is needed with governments to ensure that issues around taxes and land laws are dealt with?
Well, a lot of coordination. In the countries that we studied as part of this report, we found one interesting country is Malaysia, which has had some success in this field. But during the course of the development of that market, it's actually changed the government agency that's responsible. It started off actually as a corporation that the tourism department actually owned, and they've realised, of course, after a while that you do need to integrate these policies. So there is now a more whole-of-government approach in that case. There are many sort of challenges to these things in the Pacific Islands. You know, the taxation systems are quite different from one country to another. But on the other hand, there has been some successes. You know, Fiji has had successes in being able to sort of move to a country like that, buy property and then resell it. Policies change, of course, from time to time. And I think the underlying sort of message that we would give is consistency. We need to see consistency in those things. For that market to really be developed, you need to be confident that you can spend 10 years plus in a country and then be able to liquidate your assets when you retire back to the country where you came from. You also need to be confident that you're able to actually keep your money in the bank while you're there, and that there won't be any sort of disasters in that respect. So these are things that do need to be integrated. And again, it comes back to this question of a kind of whole of government approach, I think.
Okay, thank you, John. Do we have a question in Sydney? Yes, ma'am.
Just about who's providing the capital for this for the tourism infrastructure, and what policies have been put in place to ensure that the benefits or the economic benefits from this are staying in country rather than being delivered externally?
Again, a great question. One of the report actually identifies sort of 3 or 4 key pillars of sort of policy development that need to be in place. And if I can take the second part of your question first, one of those pillars is to ensure that there are mechanisms to sort of better integrate tourism into local communities, what we would call the efficiency of the tourism industry. And I think around the world we're seeing the same thing. God, a lot of the work that comes to the bank in tourism now is coming from other sectors. You know, how can the agribusiness sort of sections of the community, food producers get better connected to the tourism generating sector of the market? And I think this whole idea that Marie touched on of community-based tourism, ownership of assets, etc., this is something that governments can make policies on. The Seychelles has just introduced a very interesting policy to ensure that assets are where they can be owned by local people, not just because they think that's a good idea that locals should own it, but because it's actually part of a very serious commercial strategy to diversify the product as well. Coming to the first part of your question, I think capital is a critical sort of limitation in the market. There's no question. Where the bank has been involved in financing hotels in this region, they are some of the most complex assignments that we find ourselves undertaking. How do we solve that problem? I think this is one of the sort of ideas that the report proposes, that this is going to require some kind of joint initiative. There is no one institution that has the capital to even build a big hotel these days. It's not because they don't like the idea of tourism, it's not because they think it's a bad sector, but there are capital limitations. There's headroom limitations, there's risk and pricing considerations which come into account. And so we have to find some creative solutions, and in other parts of the world we have looked at that, some sort of risk-sharing facilities that the bank's been involved in, but we can't do that on our own, to be frank. We do need others to be part of that solution. And it does require being able to attract some external capital. I think the region has pretty much lifted well above its own weight, I might say, in developing hotels. We have many properties now that are owned by local provident funds. Some of the hotels that the World Bank has been involved in investing in, we've been very happy to see our position taken out by local provident funds, and what I would call onshoring the equity. That's an excellent outcome as we see it. But it is a challenge. I don't have a simple solution to it, but it's something that institutions like ours and our colleagues in the development and donor community should be focusing very much on.
Thank you, John. And we've got a question from the World Bank live stream for Sonja. You mentioned that cruise ships are popular for Pacific Island nations, but how much money actually comes into the country and how much more can be captured?
Samoa did a recent survey, or rather the South Pacific, the Samoa Ports Authority, and we were able to find out that for every passenger that arrives in Samoa, they spend a little bit more than $100. So for people who actually come into the Pacific on passenger cruise ship, that's additional revenue for our people, and they usually do a lot of shopping and tours and things like that, and they don't not only spread it towards, you know, as John had mentioned before, tourism is very much for everyone. It's everyone's business. So for the cruise passenger that comes in, that's a bonus for everyone in the Pacific. And there are some countries who do it well, and mainly because they're in the backyards of Australia. As you know, that this is one of the biggest cruise ship hubs, you know, with P&O, Carnival, and so forth. So for some of us, you know, we get a fair share, but we'd like more. So we can definitely do with more. And so we attend trade fairs overseas, especially in Miami and so forth, that actually connects us with the major, as well as here in Sydney, to connect us to some of the decision makers who actually decide on the combination of islands. And so for us, yes, aside from access, airlines and so forth that bring the visitors in, they stay overnight, there's also the cruise ship passengers who also spend a lot in shopping and sightseeing and so forth. And so that sustains the industry as well as our other, the handicraft, you know, the supply chain.
Excellent. Thanks, Sonja. Do we have a question in Sydney? Sir.
David Bierman, University of Technology, Sydney. This is really for you, Sonja. I totally agree with your comments about how important access is for people going to places in the South Pacific. Let's have another look at that in another way, and that's the issue of scheduling. So quite often to go to Samoa from Sydney, you have a late afternoon flight which arrives at about 3 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock. You then have a flight that goes back to Samoa, to Sydney, that leaves at about 5 o'clock in the morning. End result is that the traveller from here is basically ripped off from one night's accommodation getting there and one night's accommodation when they're leaving. So that already creates a feeling that people are actually not getting the full value for their visitation. So I guess my question really is this, is because Faiolo Airport in Samoa is not exactly the most crowded airport in the world and it doesn't have busy scheduling, why is this scheduling allowed to happen? And is there something perhaps that the Samoan government perhaps can do about that?
Thank you very much, Professor. You have just laid out one of the main challenges that we have, whether it's with joint venture airlines or with the airlines that have been operating into our country for quite a while. Now, all these airlines have enjoyed the business that Samoa as a destination has given them. And so our challenge right now is actually to review the JV and look at how we can either continue this relationship or now we're at a crossroads of whether we need to redevelop, you know, our own national carrier, Polynesian Airlines. Because, you know, we're the new kids on the block. Come on, give us a chance. You know, we are not the older generation who used to run everything on emotions. We have gone to good universities and we know how to handle our country. We have punched more above our weight, whether it be boxing with Joseph Parker, who just won against one of the American greats, or whether it's holding up the World Cup in Paris. You know, who would ever have thought that? So, you know, around the world we have watched that 8-minute mile. Samoa has done a lot more. And we're able, like, as I say to the South Pacific Tourism Organization, look, when everybody was coming back from Rio in 1992, in those discussions in the World Summit, Samoa sat down in 1998 and decided we were going to have sustainable tourism indicators that would measure us on how well we would sustain our culture, sustain our environment, sustain the industry, and sustain the host communities using tourism, sustainable tourism, as a development national tool. You know, and so we're in 2016. This year is our Visit Samoa year. Next year is going to be the International Year of the United Nations for Sustainable Tourism, for Development 2017. Samoa is the chairperson for that international year. So we're actually building all these things, and I thank you, Professor, for bringing that question up, because that's one of the questions that we're saying now. If you are partnering with us in the JV, prove to us that we're going to sustain this wonderful relationship. Go out on a whim and do this access. Tell us now, kick it into action, whatever plan you plan, so that we may go further. Otherwise, we have to look at other options. There are many other options with the traditional airlines have patronized our country for a long time. Or whether we need now to say to government, come on guys, we just have to take our own destiny into our own hands. Let us set up what we had before. You know, we used to do really well in tourism with North American visitors, European visitors. We were once a German colony. So in terms of nostalgic feel in the German market, they're still asking those questions. When are we going to have? And, you know, we are sort of like, what is challenging us right now, and I thank you for that, is not only time slots. We've had this discussion with the airlines. And, you know, you say that we will continue to have this discussion until the cows come home. The cows haven't come home yet. So, you know, there's so many challenges. And we just want everybody out there, all the airlines that are listening, if you want to partner with Samoa, come out, come and discuss with government. If you look at how government is mainstreaming all the wonderful policies into whether it be sustainable, we are vulnerable because we're island nations. You know, natural disasters sometimes affect us. Let me tell you this, if there's one thing wonderful about Samoa is our faith, not only in ourselves, but in God Almighty. And so, with all these natural disasters, you know, Samoa camps around our churches as soon as one is about to hit us. The cyclones have been able to avoid Samoa thus far. So, you know, we have faith in ourselves. We are going to be resilient. We want the World Bank to listen, access, and, you know, with all these things, at the end of it all, it's about people. It's very important so that we make you feel that you have a great deal. And so you start off with that wonderful beginning of a journey when you get onto an airline, knowing you're going to arrive at check-in time, you're going to check out at checkout time, and that Samoa will have early check-ins and late checkouts and give everybody a great time. Thank you.
I think I'm going to book a flight to Samoa now. This is why you're CEO of the Tourism Authority, clearly, Sonja. But thank you for that response. Mari, we've got a question for you from the World Bank live stream. We hear about big hotels and large business investments, but how can smaller family-run operations help Papua New Guinea's tourism sector?
It's a new area, and I think it falls within small and medium enterprises. They now have a policy for SMEs, which is going to provide that sort of legal framework for them to operate, get into the business. How can I think more training of how to get into. It's like the tourism is also the hospitality industry. So how can they switch into having, people that come to them who may not how let me just rethink that and rephrase that. I think it's a growing thing. People are interested, but I think one of the things that's lacking is to show them how to make it into a business. You know, to look at it as a business where they can make a profit, but also they're giving a service. And I think also that in the conversation before, we're talking about partnerships, and people know that they can partner with people perhaps within the country or outside the country who can help them to operate those businesses profitably. And I think really when they see that bottom line, there are a lot more people to be keen to get into the industry. One of the things that's lacking in PNG, I mean, we go out and we market, we want people to come, but if they come here, the cost of accommodation is also very high. And so these smaller, like guest houses and bungalows, they fill in that gap. And I think that training that is targeted for those smaller bungalows and guest houses that are spread out are beginning to mushroom around PNG to actually get into the business and have business operate on business principles. I think that's the way forward.
Okay, thanks, Mari. We've got a question from Honiara, John. Solomon Islands faces a lot of challenges such as airline access, poor infrastructure and technology. How have other Pacific Island countries overcome these challenges to develop their sector?
Well, that's like a life work kind of question, isn't it? It's, the reality is, though, as I said earlier on, the statistics show that the region's doing quite well, and then many times I kind of look at that and think, well, that's just a fantastic explanation or expose of the kind of resilience of the Pacific Islands tourism sector. I think in the case of the Solomon Islands, again, it's a volume kind of question, targeting the right kind of markets that enables destinations that are relatively small, like the Solomons, to sort of position themselves where the costs, are not such a big deal for the sort of markets that they're focusing on. And the diving markets, some of these markets actually spend very high levels of expenditure on their travel. However, ultimately, there is a certain fragility around a lot of these airline agreements that are in place. Sonja's mentioned, very eloquently, the sort of need for much more sustainable, solutions to that. And I think this is something where the region has to sit down and think this through. We can't continue a process where we have, some airlines basically dominating, others, not too sure whether they should be in or should be out. Some countries not sure whether they should own an airline or not own an airline. In many other regions of the world, that seems like an unrealistic kind of prospect for a country of such small populations to be able to sustain that. And we've seen, countries sort of come and go with access. Tonga, has had some sort of serious ups and downs in its time. We have Vanuatu now with, difficulties in access because of the airport. This kind of fragility is something that I think the region has to look at as a whole region. Because if you're outside the region and considering whether you might come to the Pacific, whether it's the Solomon Islands or Samoa or Vanuatu or even one of the smaller places, these are big issues. And the reality is that it is a big cost. And so anything that can be done to improve that kind of efficiency is something that we would be supportive of. But it requires not just the airline, it requires the governments to work together. Some of these issues on airlines that Sonja's mentioned, that there are certain commercial realities you just can't run away from. And the Pacific is often literally at the end of the road for airline planning people. The aircraft is being sent there because it's, that's the only time of the day it can be utilised, and you can't have your aircraft sitting somewhere not doing something. So as a consequence, that's a good thing for the airline, but it may end up with some of the poorer solutions from a consumer point of view. I think as a region, that's something the countries could argue much more effectively if they came together.
Thanks, John. Do we have another question from Sydney? So.
I'm from the Papua New Guinea Tourism Promotion Authority. We look after the Australian-New Zealand market. And I just wanted to follow on from some of the comments, because one of the main challenges that we face is increased competition for the Australian consumers. So over 1 million Australians went to America last year. 1 million Australians are going to Bali. the cost of travel to the US and to Bali, you can have a holiday in the USA for the same cost as it is to have a holiday in the Pacific. And I think, in terms of Australians overlooking the South Pacific and going long haul because they're able to have unique experiences at a similar price point, it is a big challenge for the South Pacific. We've been speaking with the South Pacific Tourism Organisation about a coordinated approach with all of the tourism boards to try and get the South Pacific back onto the map for Australian travellers. And I just wondered, for the World Bank, is this something that you've seen in other parts of the world where regions have coordinated and cooperated together, national tourism boards and airlines in the tourism industry, to really put a focus on their region in attracting those tourists?
Well, it is, if I may answer that question. It is a challenge. We've seen that in other regions. The Caribbean is probably the best example in terms of it being as close to the Pacific in size of islands, numbers of islands. There are certainly differences. But it takes a long time because at the end of the day, these countries are also competitors. And depending on what the kind of airline pattern of travel might be to the region, the Caribbean has quite a different airline pattern of travel to the region, which makes it, not that comparable in many respects. But we're seeing an increasing move towards that cooperative process. This whole regional integration issue is a big thing in many parts of the world. The same thing in the Indian Ocean islands, although they are much further apart, the Mauritius and Seychelles, etc., where there is cooperation underway, and that gives them a slightly stronger position of competitiveness. But at the end of the day, you're right, the Pacific is a high-priced destination. Part of that is because it's a high-cost destination to deliver the service. And I think one of the things that comes out of this report is we need to simply recognise that and not try to change that. We should work on what can be done to make it more efficient, but at the same time look at the sort of global position and acknowledge that pricing. And then look at where some of those development markets might be, where that isn't such a big deal. And recovering the former glory, in a sense, of the Pacific's access to those longer haul markets, the North America, Europe markets, is part of that solution, we think, which we just feel would position the destinations much more competitively. But to do that, you not only need the access, you need better and higher quality facilities and investment in the accommodation infrastructure in particular. And so this is all part of a pattern that needs to be kind of thought through.
Sonja?
Thank you for that question. And I almost want to feel sorry for all of us who work in tourism in the Pacific. Because as you're well aware, we compete against some of the major markets. We compete here in Australia with Australia. You have the Gold Coast, so there's domestic travel. And we're always in there to try as much as possible to introduce to people our destinations. We also do the same in New Zealand, so we have all this competition. But one of the things, and of course we have limited budgets, so we try as much as possible to look innovatively at how else we can promote our destinations. One of the wonderful things that has now been happening in the Pacific is that, take for the case of Samoa, is that we were able to reach out and say to the film productions, Survivor USA. We've hosted Survivor USA in 2009, and we've also hosted them in 2011.
Oh, really?
This year, we are hosting, guess where? Survivor Australia. So we look innovatively at how we can actually position ourselves in the markets. So we're thankful that we can do that, and that although I asked Network 10 if I can be the host, they said no. But the wonderful thing about it is that additional 32.5 hours of prime time will actually also feature Samoa. So these are some of the opportunities that we must go into. We should not just look at the marketing programs as we lay it out in the National Tourism offices, and that government can, the budgets that we get. Social media. And that's the reason why we keep on saying connectivity, connectivity, connectivity. Not only in access, but also in technology. That we must be able to put ourselves out there. Don't be scared of internet. There's so many people on the internet. Just as long as we are focused. But we thank you for the work that you do in Australia, because we definitely need you in the marketplace to tell everyone of how wonderful PNG is. And because it is. I've been there, and the potential Mari, congratulations that now you're the Director General. I will work with you, girlfriend, to ensure that we put the Pacific on everyone's map. Okay, but thank you for that question. It gives us, how can the others help us? Well, if you look around, we in the South Pacific Tourism Organization, we had attracted the assistance from the European Union. Unbelievable. All the way from Europe to help us with what we call the Pacific Regional Tourism Capacity Building Program to build up the human capital, okay? So we're into discussions again for EDF 11. And that looks at building up our people and whatever other areas in tourism that we need. But one of the things, why not everybody else here in the region help us out? But even though that those are extended to us, the number one comment from all the development partners is that we cannot help you with marketing. That is your own. So countries such as New Zealand help us with marketing. And so we're thankful for that, but very limited. So we just have to keep on saying to our governments, give us more budget. And also look at innovatively how we can actually utilize digital technology. Because one of these days, we will be reckoned for being a wonderful region. And never give up. We own 50 million square miles of islands and oceans. That's a lot to be reckoned with. And everybody else wants a bit of the Pacific for fishing, for all the other things. But tourism is the most important sector that we can develop as a national development tool. So I just don't give up, keep on going, we will be there.
Mari, did you want to add something to that? Mari, did you want to add anything to that?
Yes. I'm not losing you, but it's just not really clear.
Oh, sure. No, I was just asking you, was there anything you wanted to add in addition to Sonja's comments?
I think some of the things that she's talking about, I think in PNG, I think one of the things that is becoming apparent now is that tourism is beginning to, bring that sort of awareness to people that it is and can be a very viable type of business or area to develop businesses in, for now and the way forward, that it is something that maybe needs very little capital. But mainly this is, if you're looking at involving communities, local communities where the tourist attractions are located. I think people are beginning to be aware that this could be a very lucrative industry. But, up here at the level that we're talking, the national level, yes, we can see the importance of it and all that. And we can see what it can do for nation building. But I think the disconnect, there can be a disconnect between up here, what we perceive, and down there, with local communities where the actual, what we call them here is resource owners. These are the people that are custodians of things that can become products to attract tourists into those areas. So I feel that, sometimes the context, in contextualizing the benefit of this industry to not just people who can understand it or the well-traveled, but it's the people that are offering, providing the tourism offer in our countries that need to be aware of the benefits, not that they can do something, get money straight away, but that it is an area of investment where it takes a lot of serious thinking, a lot of serious planning. Some of the things that John was saying that are highlighted in this report that was launched yesterday. So I just want to add that I think for us in Papua New Guinea, because given the great cultural diversity that exists, everything, it's not everything, but for this particular industry, we really need not to lose sight of the aspirations of the indigenous people. Oh my gosh, I hope I don't sound like a politician, but the contribution and understanding of where this industry is going to go for PNG is going to be really driven not only by the industry, but by the local people, the custodians of these resources, who understand what it can do for them and their families, but what it can contribute to, safe communities, clean communities, what this industry can give back to its own people. And I think that is where for PNG I see, and this may be really a personal observation and comment, but once we bridge that gap, we have an industry that can be sustainable, and every single time we will have products that we never really envisaged. I mean, in PNG, some of the products are World War II history things, relics, there's natural environment of volcanoes and things like that, but people are living around these things. And I think that I feel that that's why I said earlier that policy is very important, policy areas. It's very important to not only protect, but to actually give, I guess in a way to empower these people to see where this industry can help them. And I think sometimes too, like in any business, if you can see the benefits for yourself, there's no stopping you in jumping in and being part of the, part of the cause. So I think the way forward for this industry in PNG, given the diversity, is to bridge that disconnect, and we mustn't lose sight that not only industry but local communities can really draw a lot. And when they do draw a lot, and when they take ownership, this industry can go, into areas that we right now in this year we haven't even thought about. So, that's what I'd like to add to what has already been said. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mari, for that. And on that positive note, that brings us to the end of our discussion today. Can we please thank our panellists, Sonja Hunter, John Perrottet, and Marianna Ellingson. Thank you.